Sri Ramana and Arunachala, G.V. Subbaramayya. The relationship between Sri Ramana and Arunachala is a grand mystery. To view it from our level ascribing an individuality to both, it was surely antenatal and supramundane. In terms of human relationship, it was that of son and father. That is why Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni has described Sri Ramana as the human incarnation of God Skanda, the son of the Supreme Lord Shiva. It is commonly supposed that Sri Ramana heard the first mention of Arunachala from a relative who just returned from Tiruvannamalai to Madurai, and that the hearing of the name sent a thrill through Sri Ramana's veins. Sri Bhagavan himself told this writer that this version was somewhat erroneous. Even from childhood, he had been hearing the Sanskrit verse that the mere remembrance of Arunachala confers mukti, which means salvation. But he had no definite notion of what Arunachala meant. He had a vague idea that Arunachala might be some holiest form of God Almighty. When his relative casually said that he returned from Arunachala, the very thought that a mortal could come from that supreme being was to him a thrilling revelation. When the visitor further explained that Arunachala was only Tiruvannamalai, which the boy had already known as the name of a place, it had the effect of anticlimax. It was like a fall from the sublime to the ludicrous, and the thrill at once subsided. With a death-like trance, which instantly snapped the thread of the ego and gave him self-realization, there arose in the person of Sri Ramana an unaccountable pang which grew in time till it became unbearable agony. It created an aversion in him to his school lessons and other routine activities. It inclined him to study the lives of saints, to visit the temple of Meenakshi nearby and pray for divine grace, and to sit still in samadhi, self-absorption, every now and then. Thus, it transformed the nature of the boy Ramana completely, and it finally disappeared only when he entered the sanctum sanctorum of the great shrine at Tiruvannamalai and beheld the lingam of Arunachala. When his elder brother noticed him sitting in samadhi before his books and rebuked him, saying, "Why should one who behaves thus retain all this?" The thought Arunachala at once flashed upon his mind and gripped his entire being. Yes, I must no longer be here, cabined, cribbed, confined. Arunachala is calling. He shall be my heaven, my home. This resolve that now shaped itself within the boy's mind became all-absorbing. It determined and carried out his secret flight from Madurai without any initiative of his own. It dictated his parting letter to his brother. I have in search of my father and in obedience to his command started from here. That was why the letter was left unsigned. Every circumstance favored his enterprise. The extra class, the train's delay, the strange Maulvi's direction to change at Viluppuram, free feeding on the way, Muthukrishna Bhagavadar's loan, these and other incidents prove beyond doubt the hand of Arunachala holding and drawing the little one to himself. When he arrived at the holy shrine, the gates of the 3 compound walls and all the inner doors were open at an unusual hour in the early morning, and there was no one inside. It was clear that Arunachala himself had thus prepared to welcome his beloved boy. Entering the holy presence, Sri Ramana reported himself, saying, "O Father, I have obeyed your call and come leaving off everything." The most notable event of Sri Ramana's journey was his vision of dazzling light, Tejo Darshan, at Arayani Nallur. It was the very spot where Saint Jnanasambandar had experienced a similar vision on his pilgrimage to Arunachala. Both Sri Jnanasambandar and Sri Ramana had thus the first glimpse of Arunachala, the far-famed Tejolingam, the sign of light, at the identical place. So, Kavya Kanta has sung that Sri Jnanasambandar and Sri Ramana are both reincarnations of God Skanda. All the rest of Sri Ramana's life for 450 years was spent in Arunachala alone. Within the temple compound, in the outskirts of the town, up the hill and down the hill, he dwelt throughout his life. Never once, not even during the times when the place was declared dangerous on account of epidemics, did he stray away from the environs of Arunachala. The very thought of leaving Arunachala never seems to have occurred to him. From his mother down to a casual visitor, so many people attempted to induce him to go elsewhere. His written reply to his mother's entreaties was typical and significant. Whatever is destined not to happen will never happen. Try how hard you may. Whatever is destined to happen must happen. Do what you may to prevent it. In other words, he declared that Arunachala and he were destined to be inseparable. One evening, Sri Ramana related to this writer and others seated around him how in his vision Arunachala appeared a citadel of heaven full of shrines and gods. One morning, when Sri Ramana delayed to return from his constitutional and this writer with another devotee went up and met him, he said smiling, "As the weather is fine, I have been strolling here. This hill is like my own home. Whenever I am in Arunachala, I forget myself." While relating the glories of Arunachala, he would indeed forget himself. The story of Arunachala was his favorite theme. He often used to say that while all other sacred hills and shrines were but the abodes of various gods, Arunachala is the supreme God himself, and that going round Arunachala is the direct worship of God Almighty. Once in the old hall, they were reciting Kavya Kanta's 40 verses in praise of Ramana, one of which extols the unique good fortune of Arunachala for being the chosen abode of Sri Ramana and attributes it to the accumulated merit of providing home for so many sages. On hearing this, Sri Ramana smiled and asked, "But why? What merit did Arunachala provide home for those sages?" By this question, Sri Ramana meant obviously to emphasize the fact that Arunachala is the supreme God and naturally therefore drew to himself Sri Ramana as well as all those sages of yore. The 5 hymns to Arunachala are the magnum opus of Sri Ramana in devotional lyric poetry. Of them, the first is Akshara Manamalai, meaning the marital garland of letters. It was composed by young Ramana in response to the request of a devotee for a song to be sung while wandering in the town for bhiksha, meaning holy alms. It is an acrostic of 108 couplets with the initial letters in the alphabetical order and with a popular refrain. It unfolds an allegorical love story and depicts the Madhura Bhava, meaning erotic sentiment of devotion. Arunachala is the lover and the singer is the beloved. The lover made secret love to the beloved while she was in her parental home. At the mere thought of his name, he stole her heart. He eloped with her stealthily and brought her here. While she is now harassed by so many enemies, he remains unmoved as a mountain. She remonstrates and complains of her lover's neglect and indifference. "Having entered my home and lured me to yours, why do you keep me prisoner in your cavern? Having seduced and ravished me, if you deny me union and abandon me now, would it be chivalry? Nay, such desertion will be a memorial column of shame for you. Having called me and lured me here, it is writ large in your forehead to look after my well-being. If you will not unite with me, I shall be melting away in tears of anguish. Pray rain your mercy on me, ere your fire consumes me to ashes. So runs her love plate. Then for her harsh words of remonstrance, she apologizes to her lover and prays for the bliss of complete union and merging. Pray close me in, limb to limb, body to body, or I am lost. Let us embrace one in the real self on the soft flower bed of the mind. Come and sport with me in the open space of the heart where there is neither night or day. May I be absorbed into you as food is assimilated into the feeder. At last, the prayer is fulfilled. The love is consummated in marriage, and with the bride's invocation to the bridegroom, O Lord Arunachala, throw around me your garland, and let me place on your breast this garland strung by me. The song concludes. In this poem, Arunachala is described and addressed in the most fascinating terms. Arunachala is the real meaning of Om, unexcelled, unparalleled, the magnet that attracts the iron fillings of devotees and holds them fast, the ocean of grace in the mold of a mountain, the gem of fire sparkling all around, the treasure of divine grace got without seeking, the elixir of all life's ills, the spider whose spreading web entices into its meshes and devours all egos, the wizard who exercises the ghost of the ego and then himself possesses the being, the mountain drug for all madness, the undifferentiated effulgence of final knowledge in Vedanta. The word Arul, meaning grace, occurs in nearly every stanza so that the whole song may be called a rhapsody of grace. This love lyric is indeed an allegory of Sri Ramana's own life story and so is full of autobiographical interest. The initial mention of Aragu and Sundaram, the parents of Sri Ramana, strikes the key note to the personal strain running throughout the song. Like the sonnets of Shakespeare, it furnishes the key to unlock the treasures of the poet's heart. While sounding the depths of philosophical wisdom, this song stirs the tenderest chords of human heart and makes the most daring flights of love romance in the spiritual firmament. It was and is sung on all auspicious occasions in the ashramam. Though Sri Ramana always declined to be drawn into a discussion of its diverse interpretations, he would sit up in a trance of ecstasy whenever it is sung. Just before Sri Ramana's Mahanirvana, this hymn was being sung in chorus by the devotees who assembled outside his room. Sri Ramana opened his eyes. Then, as he closed his eyes, tears of ecstasy gushed from their outer edges and he breathed his last. So, this song into which Sri Ramana had breathed the essence of his divine spirit became appropriately the background music to his life's finale, like the glow of mellow light around the setting sun. Next in chronological order comes Navamani Malai, meaning the garland of 9 gems. This is a collection of 9 casual verses in various meters. Its underlying sentiment is also love and devotion to Arunachala. It explains at the outset the idea of Achala Tandavam, motionless dance of the Lord. He is static and dynamic at the same time, the glorious source that absorbs and transcends both the aspects is this Arunachala. The verbal root meaning of Aruna is also set forth. It means respectively either Satchidananda, being, knowledge, bliss, or the Supreme Self, the individual self, their identity, or that thou art. Achala means the Great One, That is why the mere recollection of the name Arunachala confers mukti instantly. The rest of the poem is a call to complete self-surrender and a moving prayer for forgiveness of faults and for deliverance. It is impossible to ford the sea of samsara and get up the shore unless Arunachala, out of his more than maternal love, stretches forth his hand of grace. This song is also autobiographical. It relates how Sri Ramana was born of virtuous Sundaram and Aragu in the sacred Tiruchuri and was rescued from the coils of ignorance, even in early youth, and raised by Arunachala to his own seat. The poem is, in short, a paean of praise and thanksgiving. The next hymn is Arunachala Padikam, the 10 verses on Arunachala. It really consists of one invocatory verse and 10 stanzas, all in the same meter. It observes the rule of Muktapada Grastam, that is to say, the last word of each verse is repeated as the first word of the next verse, so that the whole poem reads like a chain of linked sweetness long drawn out. It is also a devotional love lyric and is full of autobiographical interest. Arunachala the lover has stolen the guileless singer in early youth for thinking of him but once, and having drawn the beloved to his feet and keeping her long like a frog amidst the lotus stalks, is slowly consuming her ego. The singer surrenders to the will of her Lord and prays for completing the process of devouring and for changing the frog into a bee that tastes the honey of the lotus blossom. The song concludes with a warning and an appeal. It warns the worldly wise, saying, "Lo, I have newly discovered a magnet mountain that attracts all beings who think of it even once, makes them still like itself, and preys upon their sweet lives, egos. That magnet mountain is Arunachala. So beware and keep off." At the same time, the singer makes a clarion call to all kindred spirits who have renounced the worldly life in quest of the means of deliverance. The singer shouts, "Here is the panacea, the sovereign remedy, the wonder drug for all the distractions and ills of life. If you merely think of it but once, it cures you. It kills without killing. It kills the ego without killing the self. Many have been thus saved like me. It is none other than Arunachala. You, all afflicted beings, know this and be saved." The next and grandest hymn is Arunachala Ashtakam, the 8 verses on Arunachala. Sri Ramana himself related how it was composed in the course of a walk around the sacred hill. All of a sudden, the first word of the hymn flashed into his mind and with an irresistible urge composed itself into the first stanza. Then, the last word of the stanza lingered in the mind and clamored for further expansion into the second stanza. The same process was repeated in the other stanzas, and at the end of the 8th stanza, the urge for expression automatically ceased. So, the stanzas are of uniform meter and observe the rule of Muktapada Grastam like the previous hymn. This hymn is a masterpiece of philosophical poetry in which both thought and style reach their high watermark. For its superb symphony, it is a universal favorite among music lovers. It is also autobiographical and reveals the mysterious association of Arunachala with Sri Ramana from childhood and the part played by Arunachala in his process of self-realization. Arunachala is the real self that manifests itself when the ego mind traced back through self-enquiry merges in its source. This song is distinguished for the daring originality of its thought and imagery. To search for the essential inner truth of thyself, Arunachala, is like going round the earth to see the sky. It is like the sugar doll diving to measure the depth of ocean. To quest for God elsewhere, turning away from thyself, Arunachala, is like searching for darkness with a light. Those who fail to visualize the one, matchless, resplendent diamond of Arunachala are like the blind that cannot see the sun before them. The mind that has contacted thee, Arunachala, and is sparkling itself like a cut or polished gem will not need another light to kindle it, just as a sensitive plate exposed to the sun will not take on impression afterwards. A mysterious Shakti, power, in thee, Arunachala, which, however, is not apart from thyself, illumines with a reflection of thy pure light, is latent, subtle dark mists, which then manifest within as thoughts whirling in the rolls of prarabdha, past karma, and are projected without across the lens of the mind and the outgoing senses as the passing world picture upon the unchanging screen of thyself, Arunachala. Whose dives within for tracing the source of the eye, thought and attains the seat of the heart, Arunachala, becomes at once the sole monarch of monarchs and transcends all in and out, vice and virtue, birth and death, happiness and misery, light and darkness, and other dreamy dualities. Just as the waters rising from the sea as vapor and coming down as rain must flow back into the sea and fatigued, must needs return to the earth for rest, so every being must finally retrace its way to the source and merge in thee, thou ocean of bliss, O Arunachala. It will be seen that in the above passages, the poet makes use of irony of metaphors called from nature and from arts and science such as photography and cinema. This is all the more remarkable as Sri Ramana had never handled a camera, nor had he ever been to a cinema show. The last and the most famous hymn is the one entitled Arunachala Pancharatnam, 5 Gems to Arunachala. While the other 4 hymns were Tamil compositions, this one was composed by Sri Ramana in Sanskrit at the request of Kavyakanta to serve as introduction to Sri Ramana Gita. It was later rendered into Tamil by author himself. It has become the daily prayer of all devotees. These 5 gems have been praised by Kavyakanta, saying that they contain the quintessence of the whole Vedanta, and though terse and brief are all comprehensive like sutras, aphorisms. As Sri Ramana never studied Sanskrit, how he could compose this Sanskrit classic is a wonder which can only be explained on the ground that he had realized that by knowing which everything else is known. As to the Maharishis, of your so to Sri Ramana Maharishi, the usual order of thought and speech was reversed. Words flashed first, and their sense followed next. In their depiction of Arunachala as Sarvatma, the universal self, these 5 gems resemble the famous Dakshinamurti Ashtakam. The opening stanza invokes Arunachala as nectaricious ocean full of grace by whose splendor the entire universe is engulfed, and it prays to him, the supreme soul, to be the sun for the full blossoming of the lotus mind. The second stanza expounds Arunachala as Swarupa, the source, in whom all this panorama arises, exists, and dissolves. It further explains how Arunachala manifests in the heart as I, the self, and so has himself named the heart. The third stanza describes the path of jnana, self-enquiry, and how, on knowing one's self, one merges in Arunachala as the river in the ocean. The fourth stanza unfolds the path of yoga, meditation. The yogi, with controlled breath and concentrated mind, meditating on thee within, beholds in thee, O Arunachala, thy light transcendent. The final stanza depicts both the paths of bhakti, devotion, and karma, action. The devotee who, with dedicated mind, beholds Arunachala alone, or the man of action, whoever reverentially serves all as the form of Arunachala shines, immersed in the bliss of Arunachala. So, this hymn within a brief compass is all comprehensive and stands out as the most glorious monument of Sri Ramana's relationship to Arunachala. This mysterious relationship was most impressively demonstrated by the celestial phenomenon at the time of Sri Ramana's Mahanirvana. At that very moment, a brilliant light in the shape of a huge star emanated in the southeast corner of the horizon and trailing majestically across the sky seemed to merge in the highest peak of Arunachala. This was witnessed by so many people outside. It was to all mortals an ocular, heavenly revelation of the life light of Sri Ramana ascending and merging in the universal light of the Supreme Self, that is Arunachala. Indeed, Sri Ramana was Arunachala's self in human shape incarnate, and Arunachala is Sri Ramana himself in mountain mold. In essence, both Sri Ramana and Arunachala are one and the same, that is the Supreme Self. Call Divine, June 1, 1955. Om Shri Ramanarpanamastu. Well, can one say of thee that thou in form art seen? Yet truly can he speak, thee formless and unseen. Ah, who can know thy nature? Can any plumb thy depths? To sound the ocean's depth with measuring tape in hand, a sugar doll once plunged and lost itself for air. Thus trying thee to know, thyself must one become. Arunachala Ashtakam, version 3.